everyone? Welcome back to another video. If you don't know who I am, that means you're new. I'm Mark. Let's go with y'all. Go check out my other videos. Check them out. Check them out. Let me make sure the microphone's still on, and it is. All right. So let's get right into it. This video, it's gonna be a little bit controversial, but I'm happy to get into it. So, what generation of Glock I think is best and why? So that is a very, very tough question. And one of the reasons why that's such a tough question is because overall, Glock is one of the most iconic firearms on the planet and one of the most reliable firearms on the planet, regardless of what generation it is. It has been proven time and time and time and time and time again. That's just how Glocks are. So, why does that make it such a difficult question? Generally because the upgrades that you find on each new generation is very minute and if not just kind of unoriginal sometimes. Now, that boils down back to the question as well, does Glock need to be more innovative, which I personally disagree with, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, off that topic, back onto what generation of Glock I think is, better than the rest or why, right? I need to go into what some of the different generations have, right? So Gen 1 was the standard, that was first Glocks that came out. Gen 2, if I'm not mistaken, they added a rail on it. I could be mistaken about that though. They added a rail, and I believe, was it rear slide serrations? I believe it was. Nothing too special. They didn't change any, I could be mistaken about that part too as well with the rear slide serrations. So if I'm mistaken, please correct me. Now, back to what I was saying. That's just Gen 2. There's no finger grooves yet or anything along those lines like we more commonly know with Glocks up until recently, which I'm going to get into in a minute as well. So that's just Gen 2. And before I continue on, I will say, I've had experience with a good few different generations of Glocks. I've had a little bit of experience with a Gen 2. I've had a good amount of experience with Gen 3s, Gen 4s, a little bit with Gen 5s, so I can say that I have a decent amount of experience with a variety of Glocks in different generations. Now, back to my original point. Gen 3 is where they added finger grooves, and just the finger grooves itself made a huge difference. Just that. And I'm a big fan of the finger grooves personally. Now, what makes the Gen 3 Glock so special, besides the fact that it has these finger grooves, is the fact that that's where a majority of the aftermarket, that's a majority of where the aftermarket parts for Glocks are. It's made for Gen 3 products. That's just generally what it is. And why is that? Is because you see more Gen 3 Glock clones because Glock lost the patent for all their Gen 3 models. So there is that, which that's always cool. That is always a plus. But there is the track record of the Gen 3 Glocks that have been used by law enforcement for decades. And that is a huge deal. That is made such a big deal that some can argue reasonably that it is the most reliable generation of Glock. So that would definitely put it in a top contender spot. One of my gripes about, the Gen 3s and below is that I personally, and keep in mind, guys, I own a Gen 3 Glock. It's not like I'm saying that, it's so bad I can't own one. I personally don't like that the grips are a tiny bit thicker than you would find with later or more recent generations like Gen 4 and Gen 5. I'm going to get into that in a second, though. But that is one of my few gripes that I have about Gen 3 Glocks, is that I believe the grip is a little too chunky, in my opinion. Is it something I can't get over? No, not at all. You know what I mean? I still have a perfectly fine grip on it. That's not an issue. I just personally like the smaller grips of the Gen 4, which is what we're about to get into now. With Gen 4 is where they kind of did a tiny bit more innovation, all right? With Gen 4, you're starting to see some models that now have, front slide serrations, which is pretty cool. With Gen 4s, you were seeing a larger mag release button. I'm a big fan of that as well. Why? Because just, sometimes you don't want to have to break your grip to release the magazine, especially in a high temp. Whatever. I have my own personal reasons for it, but not here to talk about that. On top of, the larger mag release button, they made a tiny bit thinner grip. which is phenomenal. That personally, in my opinion, is amazing, right? I'm sure some of y'all can already take a guess on where I believe, what generation I believe is best. However, what I will say about the Gen 4s and, Gen 5s as well is obviously they're not going to have the track records that the Gen 3 Glocks have. That's just how it is. And while we can argue, oh, yeah, well, it's only a matter of time, is it really only a matter of time? Because if I'm ahead of you by 20 miles and I'm going at the same pace that I keep going, right? And all you do is catch up 10 miles. In that time, I've gone another 10 miles. I'm still 20 miles ahead of you. You see what I mean? In that sense, a majority of firearms are not going to be able to catch up to a Gen 3 Glock's reputation of reliability and durability. So, and that's even just comparing it to other generations of Glocks, let alone other brands of firearms, other models with various different, whatever. I'm getting off topic here. Gen 5s, they did some things a little different that I'm not the biggest fan of, but I can also see some people's reasoning on why. Gen 5's Glocks no longer have that 100% kind of square look on their slide. It's a, tiny bit more, not rounded, you could say, but it's a tiny bit different. There is that. They did add, can't think of a cut, I guess we could say, more towards where you would insert the mag. I'm assuming that's just to help make it easier in case your mag does get stuck when you need to reload. So you can yank it out without having to sit there and just try to, fiddle around, get a grip there. But that's regardless. They removed the finger grooves. Me personally, am I a big fan of that? No. The finger grooves fit me personally. Geez, I can English. The finger grooves fit me perfectly. But that's just me personally. As I said before, I'm aware some people don't have that same experience with the finger grooves on Glocks that I have. So that can be a pro and con, you know what I mean? Does it, make me hate the Gen 5s as a whole? No, not really. It's just something that I noticed that it's not the biggest deal, but it is kind of a pet peeve in my opinion. But that's regardless. That's neither here nor there. It's a very subjective thing. This video, as you can tell, isn't going to be, a very objectively based one. This is my opinion. It's, an opinion-based video. So if you have an issue with that, go ahead and leave right now. So Gen 5s, I believe they also updated the trigger just a tiny bit. I'm not 100% sure on that one. I do want to get one of those tools that you can use to test the weight of a trigger pull, but that's, once again, neither here nor there. When they got rid of those finger grooves, I was pretty upset. I'm not going to lie. One thing also that kind of makes Gen 5 Glocks a bit more iffy when it comes to my thoughts on them is the aftermarket on them is much smaller than it would be for Gen 3 or Gen 4 Glocks. Why is that? It's because the internals are generally not the same size. I believe that actually goes for Gen 4s as well when it comes to, versus Gen 3s. Besides the point, though, my whole point is that generally speaking, the aftermarket is not going to, be as wide as it would be or as, as plentiful as it would be with, Gen 3 Glock products. But all we have to do is just give it more time and, eventually it'll catch up. That, the aftermarket is one thing that can catch up. That's one of the few things that you can catch up with. But overall, what generation do I think is best and why? My personal belief is that the Gen 4 Glocks are best. That is my personal belief. Now, will I say that there is a close second, if not even a tie with first place? Yes, and that is a Gen 3 Glocks. And why am I going with Gen 4s? Well, for starters, I am a big fan of the thinner grips. I'm a big fan of the larger mag release button. Overall, I've had zero issues with any Gen 4 Glocks that I've ever come in contact with when it comes to reliability or durability. So, me personally, I do like the Gen 4 Glocks more than the rest. Gen 3, I would put as a close second. Now, I'm sure some of y'all are wondering, why would you put it as a close second or even tied with first place when it doesn't have some of the qualities that you like about Gen 4s more than the rest, which is thinner grips, larger mag release button. And yeah, that is true. The Gen 3 Glocks don't have those features. However, what features do they have that I like? They still have the finger grooves. That's for starters. They have the track record of durability and reliability that I more than require for a firearm, especially from a Glock, because Glocks are, no matter what, guys, a Glock is more likely than not going to be the best handgun you can use for self-defense simply just because of the track record of reliability and durability they have. Glock, I can't say they do no wrong because that's simply not true. The Glock 44 exists, the Glock 46 exists, so they can do wrong. However, do I think that do I think that it's not the best brand of firearm you can probably use for self-defense? I would not argue that at all. Glock is Glock has earned its reputation. Does that change throughout the different generation of Glocks? Sure, some could make that argument, that, oh yeah, I found more issues with Gen 5s than Gen 3s, for example. Sure, some could make that argument. However, is it a argument based solely off anecdotal experience or off objective truth? That's another question here. But overall, I think if we're going to go down the list, me personally, I would go down the list as 4, Gen 3, Gen 1, just because of how rare it is. If you can find a first generation Glock, then you have a keeper. You have a piece of art right there. So Gen 4, Gen 3, Gen 1, or first generation. Then I will go with Gen 5 and Gen 2. That is my list on what generations of Glock I think are best and why. Now, with that being said, I think that about wraps it up for this video. Y'all make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that bell. When you hit that bell, hit all. And whether or not you agree with me, whether you, for example, like the Gen 3 Glocks more than the Gen 4s, or you like the Gen 5s more than the Gen 4s, whatever, comment down below what generation of Glock you think is best and why. And then make sure to check out all my other videos. Y'all make sure to stay legal, stay safe, stay dangerous. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.